Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's great to virtually be with you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Joe Dery. I am the Dean of the Data Analytics Program here at Western Governors University in the College of IT. I'm thrilled to be with you for episode 4 of our Dean's Fireside Chat series, where we're going to be exploring data strategies in the digital automotive marketplace. I'm absolutely thrilled to have a fantastic guest with us tonight, Dr. Ben Flussberg, who is the Senior Vice President of Data Solutions at Cox Automotive. In this role, Ben is responsible for company-wide data strategy and governance, data science, data product development, product and marketing analytics, and Cox Automotive's enterprise data marketplace. Now, Ben has been working in this field for 20 years. He has experience in technology and business innovation, management consulting, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and product development, and has previously worked for the Boston Consulting Group, where he focused on advising companies in the automotive and technology industries. Earlier in his career, Ben worked for Pacific Biosciences, a Silicon Valley biotechnology startup. Ben has a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics from Harvard University and holds a doctorate in applied physics from Stanford University. Ben, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me here, Joe. It's really great to be here.
So maybe as we start to dive in, and before we actually dive into data strategies or anything too specific around Cox Automotive, maybe you could tell our students, our prospective students, our alumni, and our guests a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you made your way into analytics.
Yeah, sure. And you read off a little bit of my background, so I don't have to go into too much detail, but I'll be honest, it wasn't necessarily something I envisioned 20 years ago that I would be doing. And I think with like many careers, you have your kind of zigzags till you find the right spot. And so really my background was in physics, and I was in general applying that towards biology and bioengineering. So in my PhD research, I was developing microscopy for imaging of brain functionality, and in that biotech startup, I was applying that knowledge towards genomic sequencing. I did a little bit of an about face after that, and wanted to learn more about business, and so I went from academia to management consulting. Worked at the Boston Consulting Group for 5 years, where I was doing general management consulting with a little bit of a specialty in technology companies. But after a few years of that, I felt like my next move, I wanted to play to my strengths. And I had learned a lot about business and management, but I also had this background in science and engineering. And I had written code, I had done my own data analysis and image processing. And I was looking around for a company that was getting into the analytics and data and technology innovation space. I wanted to check some of those boxes. I landed on Cox Automotive, which is here in Atlanta where I live, and found myself in a great position as someone who knew both technology and understood data, and on the flip side, understood business, and it's somewhat of a unique position out there, finding people who can really speak to both ends, and so it's served me really well.
Oh, that's awesome. It's really cool to see the progression there, and I'm always fascinated to see the path that different folks go on to find analytics and find data and really find that excitement. And before, again, we dive into things around Cox Automotive, I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about the balance from your science background and how that comes into data science today, and where you see some of the overlaps between your original discipline and that work you were doing to where you are now at Cox.
A lot of it is about approach, and I would say an analytical way of thinking about problems, and the scientific method of trying to solve those problems. And whereas while I'm not doing the exact same discipline of applying physics and engineering principles towards
Mhm.
biology, the approach is still the same, which is we have some problem that we're trying to solve using data, and we want to make a prediction, or we want to prove a hypothesis, and we try to do it in a controlled way, whether it's internal data that we're trying to prove out a business case, or whether we're trying to demonstrate a new product to a customer. We want to prove that one hypothesis is right, or that one method works better than the other. And the way to do that always is to do a controlled experiment. Nowadays, they call it A/B testing often on websites. And in my experience, if you don't do that, sometimes you get pressure from a customer or from a business partner to take a shortcut. And if you don't do that, you end up not really proving things one way or the other. So that's how I apply some of that background towards my role today.
Oh, and I definitely appreciate you walking us through that. I find that in a lot of conversations, sometimes the science unfortunately gets lost as people see kind of quick wins with, some of these auto generation techniques that are out there, or perhaps you get that green check mark when a particular model has run, and making sure that you can truly understand the effect that you're having and what that means for the business is just so critical. And it actually gives me a nice tee up into the first question that's not necessarily a tee up, but how is data valuable in your perception? What makes data valuable, and how does that come into the perspective you have at Cox?
Yeah. So I recently published a blog article, kind of a thought article on this topic for my company, and I talked about three characteristics of data. We called it the depth, the breadth, and the timeliness. I might use some other language that's a little more clear though. By depth is really how much data do you have? What kind of maybe market share do you have for a particular problem, like your coverage? And the more data you have, especially when you're trying to solve tough problems and kind of find that needle in a haystack, the more data you have, the better. At the same time, at some point, you kind of hit a plateau where, is having 50% market share, is having 60% that much better than having 50% coverage? You'll get kind of diminishing returns at that point. So that's depth. Timeliness is how frequently you are updating the data. Sometimes, I would say a long time ago, people were doing things monthly, and then you go to weekly. And nowadays, often things are updated in real time or within a few minutes on the same day. And you want to tailor that towards the problem at hand. You want to do as frequently as is needed, and not necessarily more than that. But that's also an important aspect. The last one I talk about is breadth, or we also call it connectivity. And in a way, that's actually where some of the magic happens, because at least in business problems, you might have some data from a particular business vertical or a particular product that's throwing off data. And your competitors and the rest of the industry may have similar kinds of data if they have similar kinds of products. But where the magic is when you take one data set from one place and you're able to connect it together to a different data set. That's when you start developing insights. To make it a little more concrete, I'll give an example. At Cox Automotive, we have a lot of data about vehicles, about cars. Whether it's a description of the car, the value of that car, the price it's selling at, or what kind of damage and condition it's in, that's important. We also have a lot of data about consumers, what kind of cars they're interested in and shopping for on websites. And in our third area, we have market data around supply and demand. And it's actually when you connect all those together that you start getting insights that are really new and novel, and you have customers and industry experts saying, wow, how do you have access to that? How do you generate those insights? It's all about the connectivity and the breadth of data.
Oh, that's an awesome answer, Ben. So depth, timeliness, breadth, with a notion of connectivity there, really coming together to find in your eyes what that value proposition is. So I'm curious, as you start talking about data that you're getting from that timeliness factor that may be very large, and you start getting into the realm of what we may consider big data, are there some technological considerations that we should be thinking about? Any advice for folks that may be going into a company like Cox or another large enterprise, and where to start, what to consider?
I mean, a little bit like I said before, you don't want to over-engineer something, and so you want to start small, start simple. It's general advice when you're developing a new product or prediction of functionality. Get a quick win, demonstrate a proof of concept. It doesn't have to be perfect, the 80-20 rule, and you might fail, and you want to fail quickly. But if you're successful, then you can start talking about what's the right way to engineer and architect this for the long term. And that gets into the whole discipline of architecture. And part of that is how you structure the data. Part of that is how you how frequently you're sourcing the data. It has to do with, some of your elastically trying to scale compute power in the cloud. All of that comes into play, but it's always start small, grow with time. And something we're doing nowadays in my company is we used to develop that proof of concept in a little bit of a silo with data scientists.
Mhm.
And then we like say, great, we're successful. Let's go scale it. And then we start involving the engineering team, the architecture team, and they're like, no, you got to start from scratch because you didn't do it the right way. So now we try to involve multidisciplinary, multifunction stakeholders from the very beginning, at least to be aware, so they can give us advice about start this way. It's still a POC, start small, but at least you have a path towards scaling it if and when it's successful.
I think that's great advice. And I'll tell you back when I was hands-on keyboard too, trying to start with one customer or one order or one record as you're building out your code, make sure the code works, get everything in the right place, and then you can start unleashing your filters and letting more data flow in and proving that out as you go as part of that storyline is so, so important when trying to build something that's going to really drive value for the business. So I appreciate that start small and then get bigger mentality. It
I'll
makes
just add something else to that mentality is your ultimate customer, whether it's usually an internal customer, a business stakeholder, they don't want to wait 6 months for something to be perfect. You want to demonstrate quick value, and then they'll tend to give you more investment after that to grow. That's another reason to start small, so that you can build that trust and reputation, get more investment and resources behind you to grow and scale.
So building on that too, so building in the trust and the collaboration, the partnership, you started mentioning kind of democratizing the data in a lot of ways and bringing in these other teams and these other functions and breaking down the silos that data scientists may live in at some point. Is there an opportunity here for things like data mesh architectures, for example? Any concerns that you may have around that, or maybe opportunities with data literacy, things like that?
No, absolutely. At Cox Automotive, data mesh is like a hot term with I would say a little bit different definition. Everyone has a little bit of a different definition, but some of the core tenets of a data mesh is that it's a self-service platform. So you make data available for others to consume it. You have domain ownership, and so there's people giving data to a centralized platform from different business units, and then the consumers from other business units. The ones that are donating that data or providing the data are really the domain experts of their business. And so one of the principles of data mesh is that they own the quality of their data, but their data becomes an enterprise asset to be used by all. And a third tenet is treating data like a product.
Mm.
It's not just exhaust. It's not just something to store, in a raw format. You need to consider it a product that you think about, where is it headed? How should it be structured? What could it be used for? And treat it that way with a product owner. And so that's how we think of things at Cox Automotive. We have it's this sort of the yin and yang of centralization, but also federation and partnering with the businesses in that way. I'm not going to say it's always easy. It can be challenging to really figure out what role everybody plays in the governance of all that, but it's an important consideration.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and I appreciate the approach you're taking at Cox to do that. It reminds me a lot of a hub and spoke model in a lot of ways, but making sure that there's great communication back and forth, and that there's really a one team mentality that you're driving forward with. So where I'd love to go from here then, as we start thinking about, okay, you have different aspects of the enterprise that are contributing. We're trying to ultimately get to the depth, the timeliness, and the breadth to drive value. I'm curious how this starts playing into decision making in particular, and this concept of decision intelligence systems, and how do we make sure we have the right data and the right insights in the right place at the right time in front of the right people. So what's your view on the decision-making process as it relates back to driving value with data and being able to bring some of these data products to life?
It depends a little bit on each individual situation and also who the stakeholders are. And so, you can use data both for business decisions. You can also, you can provide insights that inform decisions, and you can also use data to make predictions and even automate prescriptive decisions that just happen automatically. And there's sort of a continuum of going from insights to predictions to prescriptions. And so at the very first layer, you want to provide those insights to the right decision makers in the company, whether they're product managers, business operations executives, and you need to do it in a way that's consumable for that team, that individual, the specific situation at hand. And so it requires a lot of collaboration and I think communication, because just dumping data on somebody without explaining it, or dumping an insight that's not presented in a chart or graph that's easy to understand, it'll be dead on arrival. And then other situations, and maybe as you kind of mature up the continuum, you build that trust, you can move all the way towards automated decision making in certain situations. And we do all of that at Cox Automotive, depending on the situation and on the business question and problem at hand.
No, I think that's a great point. And I was starting to think as we're going through this, it's really about, in order to affect change with what you're building, how do you start thinking about how people are going to use this data when you may be showing too much or too little? How are you going to build that trust and that engagement? And there's really an empathy and an EQ component to this, and a lot of that comes back to change management practices as well.
I was going to say absolutely, and part of that is put yourself in the shoes of the business stakeholder. Try to understand their business as well as you can, because if you're just answering questions about data and you don't have the context, you won't answer them well. And then put yourself in their shoes. What are they looking for right now? What do they need to communicate? What decision do they need to make? So you can help them do that.
When we start thinking about the decision that they need to make as well, the one thing that a lot of folks sometimes think is in opposition to what ML and AI can do is the notion of gut feelings and intuition that may come from experience that somebody may have in a role. And a lot of times folks are of the mind that that may be in direct conflict with what a machine may be offering. And personally, my opinion has always been these two things need to blend together in harmony, right? There may be circumstances where that gut reaction and that experience makes a lot of sense and really should be the way they move forward, and it's not something the algorithm knew. And other times, the algorithm actually knew more, and it's more of a delicate balance of how you educate the stakeholder on where their knowledge may not be as complete, or there may be something else happening that they're not privy to. What's your thoughts on the role of intuition and gut feelings when it comes into these data-driven decision-making processes?
I mean, we think about the art and the science, and it's not necessarily about intuition, but it's about experience, and they really go hand in hand. An algorithm is only as good as what you teach it, what somebody teaches it, whether you're explicitly doing that or programming it or labeling data, somebody has to teach it. And if you take the example of labeling data in the automotive sector, you need somebody who's a subject matter expert to go and label those images with certain, what parts they are, what damages they have on the car. And then, what we tend to find is that you start with some business expertise and subject matter expertise, you develop an algorithm and it's really good, but then you start finding edge cases where it's off, and you need somebody with the art and the intuition and the understanding to go and find those and then explain to you, well, okay, now we know how to make the algorithm better. And it's a never ending cycle because the market changes, situations change. And so it's this interplay and dynamic between art and science that they really go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure for our students and prospective students and others that are on the phone right now, I think one of the key takeaways here is that, you can't just ignore either of those two ends of the spectrum. They have to come together. And when you start thinking about when you're putting these insights in front of your stakeholders and the decision makers, how do you give them avenues and paths for being able to let their knowledge and their experience come into that process? And if they need to be able to tweak a result or a decision, that you let them do that, but also capture what they're doing. Like try to figure out what are those edge cases or how can you improve the algorithm, and use it also as a vehicle to build trust. There's nothing better than having a stakeholder who becomes a co-author in the process. So
Right.
off of that comment then, Ben, I'm curious, how does recursive feedback come into what you've built at Cox as you put these insights in front of both consumers as well as internal decision makers?
I mean, as I said, kind of before, starting small and then growing more mature over time, the ultimate algorithm is one that makes a prediction, compares it with what actually happened, feeds that back in, and changes. That's what machine learning is. Most of the time, we actually don't build our initial algorithm that way because it's a lot of work, it's computationally heavy, and it may be overkill for where you are in sort of the development cycle. And so usually we will train an algorithm on historical data and try to fine tune those predictions, but then you launch it and you see what happens. Then over time, again, as you scale and grow, then you start building in that automated recursive feedback to make it true machine learning. But it's not always needed for every business case at hand, or I wouldn't always start there.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I got to imagine that it's probably either where you have high volatility in your data, so where there will be probably more edge cases than normal,
Yeah.
or where you may be trying to change the way a part of the business is working or go against the common experience or the gut feeling, where you're going to have more of that change management type initiative. In those cases, though, in those edge cases, I'm curious, if you're really empowering the stakeholder or the customer to be able to make those decisions, how do you find the right balance of how much data to share with them as they're looking to make that decision?
I think it also it depends a lot on the background and personality of
Mhm.
that individual and what kind of time frame they have. Uh, I've had all sorts of different kinds of business stakeholders over my career. Some are able to make a decision or want to make a decision based on very little information, very little data, because maybe they have a ton of experience, or maybe it's a quick decision that needs to be made and you want to avoid analysis paralysis, as they say. But other business stakeholders may be more analytical or more desiring information before making a decision, and it really ends up being a collaboration that you work with them. And for that kind of first personality, I said that maybe doesn't want as much information, that
Mhm.
maybe becomes the onus on the data team to not only provide information, but even a recommendation or options, let's say, data-driven options, so that more intuitive executive stakeholder can make a quick decision based on some very clear options.
Makes a lot of sense. So there was one other thing that you said earlier this week, Ben, when we were connecting that really stuck with me. And I'm hoping that you can share this piece of advice with everyone who's in the audience today. You said to me, there's a lot of value in putting a name on something. And I thought this would be a good time to bring that up, given that we're talking about these decision intelligence platforms. Maybe you want to introduce DriveQ and what you're doing there at Cox. But could you speak a little bit more to what you meant when you said that to me this week?
So I'm not a marketer by background or even by my nature, but I've come to appreciate the importance of branding and marketing. We all are familiar with it in our personal lives, but it's important even in a data-oriented career. And so Cox Automotive, we've been doing data science. We've been building our enterprise data platform, all of this for years. And we share our, we connect and we clean the data. We share it with our analytical stakeholders. We provide predictive insights to drive the business. We've been doing all this for a long time, driving a lot of value. But we kept getting the same question from our customers. When is Cox Automotive going to start using all that data that they have? And I kept saying, we already do. You don't even realize what we're providing. It's under the covers. You don't even notice it. And I can't tell you how many times our CEO got that question, and it kind of propagated its way down to me. And so, together with our marketing team, we decided it's time to put a name to what we do. And we engaged with some marketing experts, and we sought feedback from customers, and we landed on the name DriveQ. Drive being a nod to the industry, the automotive industry that I'm in, and the IQ implying intelligence. And there's a great logo for it. Gives us a way to talk about it. It's a thing now. It's not just this abstract. We pull data in and we make predictions. That's hard for to capture the hearts of our customers and even our internal stakeholders. But when you have a great name for something, it just makes it easier to tell that story. And stories are important for conveying what you do, what you achieve in somewhat of an intuitive and emotional way.
I'm hoping for the folks that are listening in, a lot of times the notion of data storytelling comes up, or we see these books around data storytelling. And I think the example and the way you described it really brings to life why that's so important and how these things have to take on a persona and a life of their own and become truly something that you can market and build trust. And there's a brand equity that comes with it and all those true marketing tenets. And I'm curious, we're now talking about marketing and branding in the notion of data analytics and data science. What are some of the skills that may be a little bit more non-traditional that you may be seeing on your teams or other analytics teams throughout Cox?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it actually brings me back to what I said earlier at the beginning about my own background, which is I was going down this path of technology and analytics and innovation, and then I did something else with more, business understanding and management experience,
Mhm.
and now I'm meshing the two together. And I think that brings me to answer your question, which is the most powerful data scientists that I see are the ones that really understand the business, really understand some of that EQ aspect, and are good at communicating. And so I would say, for all you data scientists or aspiring data scientists out there, don't overlook the soft skills. Those are really, really important to driving impact and extracting the most value out of your technical skill set. And on the flip side, the most powerful and best product managers that I see, at least in the data space, are the ones that maybe have an engineering background or were former data scientists themselves. This is a career track that we're actively encouraging at Cox Automotive is data scientists move into a product manager. We call them AI product managers
Hmm.
because now you're having someone who's interfacing with the customers and the business, but they understand what's possible and how it can be done. And they're able to work hand in hand and speak the same language as the data scientists. And that combination, I would call it anyone who has multidisciplinary skills is very, very valuable in the market. And it gives you a lot of career value too.
I'm thrilled to hear you talk about that job. It reminds me, I've seen similar job postings called analytics translator, and I think there's a few different ways companies are trying to describe that right balance that you just alluded to. And for all those students and learners that are on the call right now, again, in the prior fireside chats, we've talked about the different roles that are starting to emerge under this wider analytics umbrella and how you can really play to not only the technical skills with coding or the math-based skills or the soft skills, but also the combination of those three things and based on your personal preference and what really excites you and drives you and gives you passion, that fire in the belly. There's a lot of different roles that are out there right now. And, Ben just described a great one with the AI product managers. And I encourage you as you're thinking about your job searches, you're going on Dr. Google or LinkedIn or whatever that job board is, as you're reading these job descriptions, think to yourself a little bit, what are some of these critical skills that are being talked about? How do you balance the storytelling? How do you balance the empathy and the EQ? How do you balance those core technical skills? And what do those levers look like for this particular job posting? What are the positions? So, Ben, I want to transition a little bit now away from not necessarily Cox Automotive, but just talk about two things that are happening in the marketplace. And there's always disruptions that are happening, whether that be macroeconomic, microeconomic, technology advancements, et cetera. And there's two in particular I'd love to get your thoughts on. The first is around COVID. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks on the phone right now that are curious about what the increase in the value of automobile prices, both new and used, because of the chip shortage, the demands from COVID, all these different things. What did that do to the algorithms behind a lot of the Cox Automotive data products?
Yeah, so first let me share for the audience at Cox Automotive, we are kind of the parent company, so to speak, of a number of more brands that you may be familiar with. And so one you've probably heard of is Kelley Blue Book. Cox Automotive runs Kelley Blue Book, and so the Kelley Blue Book new and used car values and all the trade-in values, those algorithms are run by my team. And so what we do is we take real transactions of vehicles that are happening in the various different marketplaces that we're a part of, and we run statistics and pretty sophisticated stuff, and we turn those into the retail facing, the consumer facing Kelley Blue Book values, and we also have a little less known to the common person, but Manheim Market Report or MMR values, which is our B2B business to business wholesale used car values. highly, highly used in our industry by thousands of used car dealers all the time. So normally our algorithms are pretty darn close to what the dynamic market is right now. And we're within 0.5%, 1% of what the sale prices are on any given day. And of course, things can kind of spike up and down. During COVID, everything went crazy. Not surprising. And so, when there were shutdowns, dealerships closed their doors, and you really couldn't buy a car. And so all of a sudden, you had a massive difference in supply and demand. You had Hertz was about to go bankrupt, and they were just dumping cars, and so used car values dropped by, I don't know, 10% in the course of a week or two. Our algorithms couldn't keep up with that because our algorithms tend to look at smooth history over about 30 days, or sometimes we look further back and we weight the more recent, days more heavily, but our algorithms were off. And number one, that was a problem for our customers. It was also a problem for us because we normally are so confident in our values that there's a number of places that we actually put money on cars ourselves. For example, if you go to Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer, you can get a cash quote on your trade-in vehicle right now, immediately, and we will put the money behind that. Now, the problem is when vehicle values are going crazy and no one knows what supply and demand is, all of a sudden, and our algorithms don't work, well, wait, we're going to put money on these cars? A couple of things we did. One is we started immediately publishing new charts for our customers showing basically the ratio of today's used car prices to what our algorithm was publishing, what our index was saying it should be. So we were kind of trying to give transparency to our customers about how far off our algorithms were. Where we were putting money on cars, we actually ceased using the algorithm. So for a couple of months, we went fully manual. Now we always have people, this is also some of the art and science. We have people on our staff who do price cars and put money on cars, but normally they're doing the outliers that our algorithm just can't statistically find a good score for. They went from doing 15% to 100%. These people were working overtime. And so we had to go fully human at that point. And so I think this is a great story of, again, that interplay between art and science. And when things get unpredictable and the history isn't telling you what tomorrow is going to be, you got to go back to the human element. We actually had some learnings. And from that experience, we made adjustments to our algorithm to respond more dynamically to, swings in the market. I'm not going to say it's going to respond perfectly to the next COVID, but it'll certainly cut that kind of response in half, and or maybe even better than that. So we had learnings out of it where we apply these learnings to the algorithm itself, and I think we're in a much better place next time something happens. And the truth is, it's been a wild ride for the past 2 years with vehicle prices going down and then up and now down again. And so, maybe volatile for the near future. We have to be prepared for that.
After hearing this story, then I feel more confident than ever using Kelley Blue Book, and will continue to be the place that I go to get the value for my cars. I just love the fact that you guys prioritized transparency and trust with the consumer. And I love the fact that you have that art and the science blend, knowing that the algorithms are living, breathing things, as you said earlier. And you can't just assume that they're going to stay in good health. Things happen, whether it's micro, macro, something else. And you need to be able to respond to that. So for the students that are listening, the folks that may be in industry that are listening as well, it comes down to, if you have an algorithm that's working great today, there needs to be a cadence to monitor that. So you start getting into the MLOps space a little bit, looking for data drift, model drift, looking for warning signs that something may be deteriorating or doing something different than what you're used to. And making sure that your team is set up in such a way that you can respond. And, in Ben's case, having to go manual and actually having folks that know how to price cars on staff, just shows how prepared you were, I suppose, Ben, in your case. But it's a great testament to just being ready for the curveballs that come out of left field. So thank you for sharing that with us.
I think in life and in business, curveballs happen. So, I'm not going to take credit for all this. The team and across the company, and I know many companies had to react extremely quickly to a really, really new environment that happened a couple of years ago.
curveballs can be a lot of fun at the same time too. And I'm sure your data scientists, as you say, learned quite a bit in the process, and you have a much
Absolutely.
more resilient and robust algorithm as a result.
Yeah.
So the other thing that is more recent, so is not of the nature of COVID and what that did from a macroeconomic standpoint, but everyone's been hearing about Chat GPT, for example. And I'm personally thrilled to see all the excitement around the AI and ML space and hearing people talk about analytics that have never really talked about or showed interest that are now coming to it. Everyone's drinking the analytics Kool-Aid a little bit. And some people are looking at this as a great thing with a lot of opportunities in what this can be. And some folks are looking at it with risk. And I was hoping that you could share the story that you shared with me earlier, your personal experience, and paint a picture on what your perception is of this technological advancement that's definitely, in the hype cycle right now, and where you think where this may go.
Yeah, let me start that I think ChatGPT is a demonstration of, generative AI, that basically artificial intelligence that can be creative and have a conversation. I think this is absolutely, a revolution. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen over the next few years, and I'm sure OpenAI and invested in by Microsoft are going to be using this very quickly to monetize. Soon I'm sure all the other big companies like Google and others are going to come out with their own versions. I think this is a game changer. In what ways I don't quite know, but I think of the iPhone 15 years ago, and you had like Uber was life changing, and I think this is going to be applied in so many different areas, whether it's automated customer service, whether it's writing. I mean, schools are looking at how can you prevent cheating, because ChatGPT can basically write a story or an essay for you. I've done it. You just ask it, and it'll give you something creative. It's mind-boggling every time I look at it. And the story that I was just telling Joe right before this call, it can also write code, and it can debug code in a number of different languages. I have my data science team talking about how they might use it for writing quick code and debugging. But I was telling Joe that my son is into coding, or one of my children is. Others are into art. But my son is trying to figure out how to use ChatGPT and how to load it onto his computer with Python. And he's like, I don't know how to do this. So you know what he did? He asked ChatGPT. He said, "Can you write some code for me so that I can install this on my Chromebook and connect to the API?" And it spit out 15 lines of code and gave him some instructions about how to do it, and he followed it. I mean, so it opened up something that probably would have taken him hours of research. Maybe he never would have figured out how to do it. And there's an opportunity for this to open up analytics to many more people.
I think that's a phenomenal story. And just in case anyone didn't hear, this is a 12-year-old boy that did this. And I'll tell you, when I was 12 years old, I was not figuring out how to query a REST API.
Neither was I.
It's just amazing to see the accessibility that this also provides. And again, the excitement where you now have a 12-year-old, instead of playing a video game, going on and figuring out, how to write code. And before you know it, he's going to be in a Jupyter notebook. And I can't wait to reconnect with you and hear how far he goes with this. But I also think that with this, because it is the hype cycle, there's a sense of realism that's going to come in at some point, and folks are going to have to start asking, how do you actually operationalize this at scale, and where does it make sense? Because at the end of the day, it's a delivery vehicle, and it's a delivery vehicle through very persuasive and romantic text and chat. But you still need to have prediction models behind the scene. You still need to have these decision workflows. You still need to build trust in the accuracy of what it is. And what I'm really curious to see is, how does this help from that trust aspect, right? So when you start coming out with these more complex algorithms, and again, you're trying to put the right insights in the hands of the decision maker at the right time, and they want to ask you, for example, why did you give me that answer? And it's the ultimate question of, can you explain a black box algorithm? Chat GPT might not be the thing that's going to be, actually explain it, but it'll be a delivery vehicle for it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah. To that end, I mean, I could give probably three small criticisms of this first version that came out. One is that it doesn't cite its sources.
Mm-hmm.
Two is it makes accuracy mistakes. You play with it a little bit, you'll catch some things. And three is it's not very concise. It gives pretty long answers. And so it feels a little bit non-human in that sense. Now, these things are all, I'm sure, they'll improve them over time. But like you said, there's a black box. How do you trust it? How do you know that it's really going to be accurate? Unlike a Google search that's really just giving you links so you can go find more information yourself, this is trying to give you an answer. So trust is important.
Well, thank you very much for sharing the story for COVID and this story with your son there, Ben. I really appreciate it. So for the folks on the call, I have one more question for Ben around career advice, which we'll get to in a second. This is also your opportunity to ask questions to Ben or myself or anything that may be on your mind. So in the bottom right-hand corner of the webinar session, you'll see there's a Q&A functionality. You can click right into that. You can pop your question in, and then in a couple of minutes, we'll be reading those off. And between Ben and myself, we'll do our best to answer those where we can. So for the final kind of official question, if you will, Ben, because we have so many prospective students and actual students that are on the call right now, I'd love to ask for your career advice. So if folks want to come into a team like yours at Cox Automotive, or maybe want to go into a role like the AI product manager, for example, what advice would you give them right now, knowing that they are students or recent alumni?
Yeah. I gave some advice earlier where I suggested, the more you can learn multidisciplinary skills, the more valuable you'll be in your career. Often what we learn in school ends up being or what we learn in each of our experiences in our various career steps ends up being capabilities we have. It's not necessarily the knowledge you have, it's the skills you have towards how can you apply them in situations. And I gave the example earlier of my background in science. While I'm not doing physics and bioengineering now, I am applying the same kind of skill sets towards new problems. The other advice I give, which is related to what I was saying before, is don't forget the human element. And let me give an example. You can build the best algorithm. The hardest part of getting that algorithm live in a business and making impact is the change management of changing the business well, I would say demonstrating to your end customer the value, convincing them, and then working with them to change a business process or to actually expend resource effort towards integrating with your cool technology. That is by far the hardest part. Usually we develop our first innovation, our proof of concept takes us a couple, 3 months, let's call it. Building our hardened, API that now delivers the data, the predicted product, that takes us another 3 to 6 months. And it's usually a year after that until our innovation actually goes live in a business setting, because our end users have to prioritize it, have to expend resource effort to build towards it. And then the hardest part would be changing a business process. And so the more you can learn those skill sets about change management, working with teams, working with cross-functional, large, complex matrixed environments, these are real world problems. And those are the biggest obstacles towards innovation.
There was one example that popped in my head as you were talking through them. That's excellent advice. Really appreciate you summarizing for our students. When I was hiring in analytics teams at EMC and Dell, one of the things I used to ask students, recent graduates, was how many models do you actually think that you'll be building a week, for example? And these were folks coming into entry-level data scientist roles, for example. And because they had come from the academic mindset, they were thinking, I'll be doing 4 or 5 algorithms a week, 4 or 5 regressions or decision trees or random forest, whatever it is. And it's kind of a chuckling moment, because to your point, there's so much more to actually implement what you need to do and to think about the business processes and potentially rebuild and redefine the business processes and get that trust and have a front end and really think about all those different integration points. And ultimately, the best and most productive data science teams may only be doing 1, 2, 3 algorithms a year in some cases, which I always find to be a very eye-opening moment. So thank you for triggering that memory. I appreciate it, Ben.
I'll just add, you mentioned the word ML ops earlier, and that's a big priority of ours, which is how do we accelerate and scale our AI product development, so we make it much more turnkey and we make it more consistent. That way, we at least take the onus off the business to integrate with us, because it's standardized and easy to do. There's still process changes, but we are very much prioritizing ML ops as an approach. And we want to take ourselves from that, releasing a new model every couple of months to releasing models every day. And we're getting there.
It's an exciting journey. I got my popcorn ready. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what you guys do there. So at this time, Jory, I think I'll ask for your help and Shay to be able to help us through some of the Q&A that may have come in from our audience this evening.
All, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
My microphone's having a moment. Sorry about that. One of the first questions here is, how do you know you're not introducing sample size bias?
It kind of goes back to that scientific method that I mentioned earlier. You take your sample and you try to look at it from all the different, maybe slicing it by all the different categories you might, or attributes that you might divide it by, and try to get, even and statistically, both statistically relevant and unbiased. I mean, I'll give an example. We would run experiments where we would price cars for customers in these markets, and we would actually go head to head against either them or a competitor and say, okay, basically at the end of this A/B test, who did a better job? And so with accuracy. And so we would say, in our case, we would say, okay, let's try to have a 50-50. So we would take random samples and go A and B, and we would then check to see, did we get 50-50 on the make of the car, Toyotas, Hondas. What about at the model level? Then we look at geography, then we look at mileage bands, then we look at the condition of the vehicle, and we look at all these different attributes and try to get close to 50-50. Now, the more granular you get, you start to get to very small sample size and it gets harder. But I think kind of the short answer to your question is you go random samples as much as possible.
Fantastic. Another one is, how frequently are the algorithms reevaluated and how long does it take to update them?
Yeah, it comes back to my MLOps, the MLOps discussion. In the ideal world, we are monitoring all of the algorithms, and then we detect drift and we retrain it and update it based on triggers. And we do that often, as needed, but it could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly. In reality, where we started and the journey we're on is that many of our algorithms, we put it out there and then we kind of forget about it. And part of the reason why we forget about it is some of that friction of deploying a model into true production. It can take months in the real world. And if it takes months, then gosh, are you going to really spend months to go and update that algorithm again? You're going to move on to something else and maybe come back to it when it gets urgent. And so I would say we are moving from this world of deployments every few months and updates every now and then and very little monitoring. And through our MLOps journey over the next year or two, we're going to be monitoring everything and triggering on outlier detection, retraining models in an automated fashion and deploying daily. We're somewhere in the middle of that journey right now, and some algorithms were far along and some algorithms were further behind, and in some cases it's less urgent to go on that journey.
You get a round of applause for that one, Ben. I'm really excited to see where you guys go on the MLOps piece there. That's really exciting.
Thank you.
All right. So Ben, if a data analyst were to join your team supporting the price match product, how would an analyst add value to this product? What are some of the business questions a data analyst may want to investigate in the effort to support this product?
In general, with our valuations, I mean, so what's called price match here in the question, I call it vehicle valuations and pricing. I think sound technical background is sufficient, and it's the getting to know the business and understanding the domain we're in, and being able to mix that art with the science. And so that's really the trick here. We have a lot of people in our company who have domain expertise, and we try to have our data scientists embed themselves with those people for a while and really learn the domain they're in, and they do learn it, and that's where they can add the value. Understanding the market helps you understand the business problem, and then you can understand what technical approaches are the right ones to solve it. And I'll give an example. In some cases, the most accurate algorithm is not the one that you want to use. So when you price, when you create a widely used benchmark for an industry, sometimes, not sometimes, often your customers want to know, well, Joe, you said it before. How do you get that number? Where'd it come from? And and so you might not use a neural network or a random forest that is harder to explain. You might go back to simple regression where it's very clear what the weighting of each variable is and how it contributes. It's much more explainable. Is it a 0.5% less accurate? Maybe that might be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it may also be that, maybe after an iteration or two, once you do get that trust, you do move to something that uses the more advanced algorithm. But starting there, even with a decision tree sometimes, to be able to get in front of a stakeholder and kind of walk through your if-then statements of how that comes together can often be overlooked because it's seen as almost this inferior algorithm, but can really, really help you in that change management journey.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jory?
I have a couple more in here. This is kind of following up on roles at your company. How big of a role does data engineering play as opposed to a data analytics role at your company?
With MLOps, I'm starting to see engineering and data science come together. There's a role people call ML engineer. In our company, we're calling them, I guess, model ops engineers. The worlds are coming together, and there's need for both data scientists with a statistics kind of background, and there's need for data scientists with more of a computer science and engineering background. We'll need both, and at the same time, engineers need to have a better appreciation and understanding for machine learning and how it works, because building a scaled production level API that's delivering a machine learning insight is different than building an API that's delivering something else. So I see those worlds come together, and in a way we're kind of specializing, but also there is kind of gray overlap between them.
And with the time that we have left, I think that we can spend it talking about Chat GPT. Seems like a popular topic. We have a couple questions regarding that. So the first question will be, with Chat GPT and attributions, how would you approach ethical data gathering and sanitation for public social media sources?
Well, I don't know. I'll be honest. That sounds like a big, hairy question that I'm not even sure how to answer. It's just so new. I mean, right now, something like ChatGPT is basically just pulling data off of Wikipedia and the internet, and so it's all public domain knowledge. But yeah, there are big questions, I think, with any new technology of what are some of the ethics, and what are some of the biases it can introduce when you ask it questions. Those are real questions that are, I think, over time, we collectively, humanity, will come to the answers.
You said something earlier that was a great point. GPT right now doesn't give you, for example, in-text citations. So when you start thinking of the fact that it's pulling from blogs, it's pulling from Wikipedia and other things, you could find that if you go on Wikipedia tomorrow and say that you are the king or queen of your hometown, that you may find in that essay that it's going to write that you are quoted as the king or queen of your hometown. So I think one of the things that I'll be looking for, especially from an academic setting, is how does it start building that trust? How does it give you a bibliography at the end or some kind of works cited? And I think that's something, as to your point, Ben, as we see the evolution come forward and we see more of the ethics come into it as well, all of these things need to be figured out. And if you follow the Gartner hype cycle, for example, we're definitely on the hype aspect right now. And I think there'll be some moment of realization where folks realize that to really be able to advance, humanity as a whole and a lot of what we do and the way we live and the way we work, there's quite a few of follow-up threads that are going to have to be thought, and there will be dissertations done on this. There will be patents that will come out. Every company will be working to do something. And if we get back together in a year from now, I'm sure there'll be a whole new set of topics related to it for us to discuss. So on that note, I think we'll close the Q&A. So I'd love to give a big, big thank you to Dr. Ben Flussberg, who is our Senior Vice President of Data Solutions at Cox Automotive, for his time, his insights, his story. and joining us on a Wednesday evening. So Ben, thank you very much for joining us with our students. Really appreciate it.
Welcome, and thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
It's a great conversation. I got to meet your son at some point and learn more about what he did with Python there. For everyone else who joined tonight, to students, prospective students, guests, colleagues, faculty, thank you for spending our time. Episode 5, we're going to be joined with a great person from Morgan Stanley, a good friend, who's going to come in to talk to us about data science products in the financial investment space. So we're going to go from Cox Automotive here in the digital automotive market space into the finance sector. That will be at the beginning of March. Go on to the WGU website. You'll get more information about when that next Fireside chat will be. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your studies and your jobs and your lives. And I look forward to seeing you virtually next time. Have a great evening.